School Planning Committee members are Alyssa Brewer, who's also serves on the Select Board, and Andy Steinberg, a member of the Finance Committee. We also have with us tonight Andy Churchill, who is Assistant Director of the Center for Educational Policy at UMass Amherst, and he is going to help facilitate our question and comment portion of the evening. So I'd like to begin tonight by giving you a brief outline of the process this committee will undertake in the community as we move forward toward a committee recommendation and a possible town meeting vote. This forum is the first of what we expect to be several public meetings over the next few months. We want to be sure to keep the community informed and, most importantly, to hear your questions and comments. And I also want to assure you that if you don't have a chance to speak tonight, if you're not here, if you're watching on television, there will be several opportunities to both come live and speak at public forums. And we also have a website where you can write in your questions and comments, and we will see those. The committee will have a chance to see those as well. And that website is posted up here now, and it will stay up, I think, for the whole meeting. So the main purpose of tonight's forum is to begin to collect Amherst-specific questions and concerns. Tonight is not about an open discussion, really, nor are we prepared at this stage to answer the questions, but we really do need to hear them in order to guide us as we move forward and represent Amherst in our discussions with other towns and outside consultants. As I said, subsequent meetings will provide an opportunity for this committee and outside speakers to begin to address your questions and comments. So I'm going to start by giving a very brief history of how this committee was formed. And then Alyssa will give us a presentation about sort of the current state of affairs and governance. And after that, Andy Steinberg and Andy Churchill will facilitate questions and comments and from the audience, and maybe lead us in an exercise to prioritize those, but we're going to play that by ear a little bit. So the regionalization of our K through 6 schools has been a topic of discussion in our district since our secondary schools formed a region with Pelham, and then subsequently with Leverett and Shutesbury many years ago. And I actually tried to find out exactly when that happened, and I still don't have an answer, but it was a long time ago. Most recently, as the state began pressing for towns to consolidate, former Superintendent Alberto Rodriguez commissioned a management study of the Amherst and Pelham Public Schools. And that report is called the Hammer Report. And it found that the elementary schools in our district were not closely aligned regarding curriculum, priorities, assessment. The report identified actually several other areas of inefficiencies as well. At the same time, the middle school reported and continues to report a wide range of preparedness of incoming 7th graders into the regional middle school. So as our school budgets became tighter and good schools began to recognize the benefits of aligned curriculum and professional development, the conversations about regionalizing K through 6 schools began again with some more intensity. So in 2008, in this climate, the Regional School Committee appointed a group of community members, including 3 of the 4 people at this table, and I was not one of them, to once again explore the possibilities of various changes to our current governance structure. That report was completed in 2010 and represents a great deal of very hard work. It provides a lot of very good information that could be added to the Hammer Report to give us a better understanding of some of the benefits and issues with regional schools. But as the authors noted in that report, their exploration of the issues around a regionalization process or any change to governance could only go so far without the help of outside experts to examine complicated issues of finance, governance, and the educational implications more thoroughly. So in the fall of 2011, town meeting voted to form this regional school district planning committee. Again, in an attempt to examine different possibilities for the structure of our public schools. Part of the timing of the town meeting vote had to do with the fact that other towns in our secondary region have put the idea of K through 6 regionalization back on the table, and this time with some real seriousness. This was also a conversation that we in Amherst felt we needed to be a part of. At the same time, the state was and is continuing to encourage small and medium-sized towns to form regions in order to streamline the process and the system. They are even offering some financial incentives to do so. Those incentives are mostly around elementary transportation costs and subsidies. So the Amherst Town Moderator appointed myself, Alyssa, and Andy to form this committee. Pelham, Shutesbury, and Leverett had already formed regional school district planning committees. The next step is for our 4 towns to form a regional school planning board so that we can further look at and explore what possible governance structures might work for each of our towns, both individually and collectively. And most importantly, what might serve the educational needs of our kids the best. So now I'm going to let Alyssa present sort of where we are now and some other governance issues. Thanks.
Thank you. So I haven't been in this room at this table for several years. I was on the school committee from 2002 to 2007. And as Catherine mentioned earlier, these 2 Andys and myself served on the regionalization committee that did its report in June 2010. So I am all new to this technology, so let's see how this goes. This is our first public forum. If you'll remember from our town meeting article, we said we had to have 2 Amherst-based forums. We expect to have the second one in May, and yes, that is during Amherst town meeting time, but we'll obviously pick a non-town meeting night to do that, but we want to make sure we get this done in a fairly timely fashion. But we have to have both those forums before we can join what's known as the RSDPB, the planning board, that Ms. Oppie mentioned earlier. You see our email up there. We haven't gotten any emails yet, and it's been out there for 3 or 4 months now, and our website. And the next page, I know you can all read that very clearly. That gives you an idea of how much information is on our webpage. This is all on the town website under RSDPC. Lots and lots of reports, many of which were referred to by the committee that worked on this in June 2010. Some information that's come since then, the Amherst Town Meeting article, etc. Also, there's a link to a 4 towns group, which is basically a loose conglomeration now. We're not officially a planning board yet, but the loose conglomeration of the committees of the 4 different towns so that we have a place to put information. So when we have guest speakers come in, we all go and listen to those guest speakers, and then we can all look at their PowerPoint later. So all that information is being maintained on this website. Where we are currently, for those of you who aren't as familiar with this, is we talk about K-6, we talk about pre-K to 6. I put pre-K to 6 on the slides. You'll usually hear it talked about as K-6 in Amherst. So in Amherst, we have a school committee of 5 members that handles our K to 6 education. In Pelham, I have 3/5 because they're just about to change from 3 members, which I believe is what they've had for a very long time, to 5. And then you see Amherst plus Pelham equals Union 26. When you hear us talk about unions in this setting, we are not talking about collective bargaining. We're not talking about those kind of contracts. It'd be nice if there was a whole different word for it, but there isn't. So when we're talking about unions, I'll tell you a little bit more about what unions mean in this context. But Union 26 is the Amherst plus Pelham Elementary, which is then followed by Union 28, which you also hear about, which has the elementary schools of Leverett and Shutesbury and Irving, New Salem and Wendell combined. And they have 15 members on that committee. Our current structure, 7 to 12, as many of you are familiar with, is Amherst, Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury, making up a regional school committee with 9 members. 7 to 12 in Irving goes to Gil Montague. 7 to 12 in New Salem and Wendell goes to Mahar. So you can see that Union 28 is quite spread all over the place. What is a superintendency union? Basically, it's 2 or more towns, which in our case is Amherst and Pelham, making Union 26. You almost never heard about Union 26 till about 2 years ago. It was something that only people who were on the school committee generally knew very much about. But it was something that was established in 1901 by a special act of the legislature, so that we were able to follow some laws that were available then that are still available today to share a superintendent and central services. There are separate school committees for each town in a superintendency union, hence an Amherst School Committee and a Pelham School Committee. Separate school budgets for each town, which are voted independently at their respective town meetings. Their union school committee is comprised of equal membership from each participating town. So with this Union 26 concept, it doesn't matter how big the towns are, they're just each 3 members, and that's how it is. However, the role of this committee, this Union 26, is only hiring and evaluating the superintendent. And participation in that union can be terminated by any town by majority vote of their school committee. A region, on the other hand, also two or more towns, in our case, 4 towns make up Amherst Regional Pelham as it currently stands, 7 to 12. We have a single superintendent and central office, a single combined school committee for the region. That composition is determined by the regional agreement that was, I believe, the decision as to how many people from each committee was established back in 1955 associated with that, so that's something we've had for a very long time. The single regional budget is voted on by all the town meetings. Those of you who are in the town meetings, who have been to the open town meetings, are aware of that, and that it has to be approved by at least 2/3 of the member towns. Since we have 4 towns, that means 3 of the 4 have to approve the budget in order for the budget to hold. In terms of separation from a region are actually written into the regional agreement. It says in there how people can dissolve or withdraw from the region. Why does this matter? I have quoted up here someone who I didn't even check to see if she still works for the Executive Office of Education, but at the Rennie Center back in May 2009, there was a presentation where they talked about why they are trying to do what they are trying to do. We mentioned the state putting various incentives into this. Back in 2009, it was looking a little scary, like the state might make various school systems do various things, and people were worried that they would come up with a certain number of size, a certain number of districts they were willing to have in the state. And in fact, one thing and another, it didn't come to much in terms of actually holding a stick over our heads, but it got a lot of people talking about the situation, which was worthwhile. Unfortunately, because they didn't come up with a lot of money to provide an incentive, not a lot of people actually undertook all the steps to get to a place where they can combine. A few have, and there are references back on the website that I mentioned earlier associated with that, but just a couple have tried to explore this since this time period. As of 2009, which now we're talking almost 3 years ago, but just to give you a sense of what the state tends to point out to people whenever they have the chance. Just like we have 351 municipalities in Massachusetts, which surprises a lot of people. It's just not a very big state, 351 different governments. We have 329, 333, depending on which figure you look at, school districts right now, serving 1 million students roughly. And of those, you can see that they're just a whole bunch of different things. There are vocational districts, there are partial districts, there are K-12, and there are superintendency unions. The state would like it to be much simpler. They like to quote things like saying, oh, well, Maryland only has 5 school systems or whatever. It seems much simpler, and it does on the surface of things. Worries that the state was bringing to the table is that it meant that by having so many different central offices, too much money was going to bureaucracy versus instructional costs, that perhaps having school systems of all different sizes meant we wouldn't have capacity to provide all students with a broad range of academic courses and programs and extracurriculars, and of course that's coming up even today as we continue to struggle with budgets, with sports programs here in Amherst, with the arts. Whether or not administrators actually have time to support instruction or are running around filling out multiple reports, whether or not districts are structured to promote instructional and curricular alignment across different grade levels, something we've talked about a lot in Amherst. The fact that superintendents are required to respond to multiple school committees, attend multiple town meetings, and address multiple sets of administrative and operational issues. Obviously, being a superintendent in a school system that has an elementary school and a middle and high school is a whole lot different than being a superintendent in Union 26 or Union 28. And so they feel that many districts are probably not financially viable in the long term. So why are we considering forming a K-6 region? Well, as Catherine talked about, we've been talking about this since basically we formed the region. It tends to come to a peak about every 10 to 15 years, and then we only get so far with the discussion, and we end up stopping because we don't have the professional expertise to kind of take it to the next level. One of the things I wanted to mention that's also on the website was a recent grant that we hurried up and applied for just after this committee was formed. All 4 towns came together and said, we'd love to get this Community Innovation Challenge grant, but we were competing with all sorts of things, capital items in other areas throughout the state, et cetera. And so we didn't rise to the top of that list because, again, we explained in there, and that application is on the website, showing we just haven't been able to get to the next stages of being able to present details to town meetings, for example. So the potentials behind a K-6 region are probably fairly obvious from the challenges. Hopefully there would be fewer central office tasks, maybe some redundancies that be gotten rid of. I always say partial state transportation reimbursement because the state has almost never met its what it promised many years ago when it suggested regionalization many years ago, which was 100% reimbursement for transportation. We've almost never gotten that. It's fallen well below 50% in many years. The House budget that just came out today says it might be funded better. We'll have to wait and see how that comes out. But only regional transportation has any hope of getting any reimbursement at this point. If you live in a city, for example, that just has your own, you just have like an elementary school and a high school, they don't get any money for transportation. More cost-effective and coordinated professional development is something that comes up repeatedly in these conversations. More curricular cohesiveness and coordination. That's both within schools and then also as you transfer from elementary to middle school to high school level. There's certainly potential there for more efficient and effective special education programs due to a larger community of special education students rather than some scattered in this elementary school, then 2 over here, and then 5 over here. The improved ability to handle enrollment shifts, particularly in a time when all of us are facing declining enrollments, and increased predictability for long-term financial planning. Then we look at the assets and liabilities that the 4 towns that we're talking about here would bring to the table. They do vary quite a bit. The physical plant of each town's elementary school varies considerably. We talk about that within Amherst, what Wildwood, Fort River, and Crocker Farm, how new they are, what they might need over the next several years, particularly the 2 that are on the identical floor plan, being Wildwood and Fort River. The fact that Shutesbury and Leverett, which have much newer buildings, Shutesbury's nearly paid off its school remodeling bond, but Leverett hasn't. Amherst, although not all of our busing is done with our own in-house buses, we do own and maintain a fleet of school buses. Of course, none of the other towns do that. Our salaries in both Amherst and Pelham are generally higher than those provided in Leverett and Shutesbury. And for those of you who haven't gotten into the details of collective bargaining, there are multiple collective bargaining units in each location. So it isn't like there's just the Amherst schools collective bargaining. No, there are subsets to that. And so there are multiple collective bargaining agreements. Plus, of course, there are some staff that are outside collective bargaining altogether. And Amherst, Pelham, and the current 712 region are in a self-insurance health insurance plan that has costs and benefits that are more favorable than GIC. Leverett and Shutesbury aren't in those plans. Each town has health insurance obligations for retirees. We've been hearing more about that at your individual towns. OPEB, some have been getting to set aside some funds. Pelham's actually set some aside. Amherst has set up a fund to put money into. We just haven't put any money in yet. So that would each variable town is doing with that. Amherst itself has a number of in-house pre-K to 6 special education offerings that the other towns don't have, and world language offerings do vary quite a bit between the elementary schools. So then, if you do want to set up a regional agreement, what goes into it? Well, we already have one, and it's also on that website, of course. And basically, it says the composition, the boundaries, and the name of the district. I'm sure we could spend many hours just talking about the name of it. Definition of the school committee is laid out in there, how many members you're going to have, how those members are going to be formed, from how you're going to take from each town. For example, for those of you who aren't aware, the 5 Amherst school committee members all serve on the 9-member region school committee, and then 2 of the 3, or 2 of 5, soon. In Pelham, serve on the Regional School Committee, and then just one each from Leverett and Shutesbury currently. That would be laid out very specifically in the regional agreement as it is now. The method for selecting those people would also need to be laid out, because sometimes in regions, no matter how many towns are involved, people are elected at large across the different towns. Other times they're town specific, and also how long their terms would be for. It would also talk about how to apportion expenses. So that would be looking not only at capital investments, but also looking at communities' ability to pay, which is something we talk about associated with the Chapter 70 formula, versus just a straight head count. How many bodies do you bring to the table? Also, it would talk about the procedure for preparation of the annual budget, admission of students, and a procedure for modifying or terminating the agreement, because they found in the past that some agreements don't say how to make them get over, and that's kind of a problem. So how do you go about establishing a regional agreement like we did back in the 50s? What we have to do is discuss it amongst ourselves, and the process is actually laid out quite succinctly in a memo that we've received that's also on the website. Basically, we have the discussion amongst the towns. We form this regional school district planning board that would be the 4 towns, assumably at this point. Irving isn't talking to us. We're talking about Leverett, Shutesbury, Pelham. Of course, lawyers are going to be involved, and DESE also gets some say in it. It goes to them eventually, and they can say, no, this doesn't make sense to us, or, oh, have you thought about something else? Then, once it gets through all those hoops, then we would go to each town meeting and say, this is what we're ready for. And each town meeting would have to agree, of course. So, what's going to happen next? We've talked about what's going to happen at the rest of this evening. What's going to happen after this evening includes a report at the Amherst Annual Town Meeting on April 30th under Article 1. There's already been a handout that's been mailed out to those of you who are town meeting members, and there'll be a verbal report as well. Again, we're hoping to have our second forum sometime in May, at which time we hope to have answers to the questions that come up tonight. And again, our email address is just rsdpc@amherstma.gov, and the website is /rsdpc after the Amherst MA website. One other thing I wanted to mention is that there are some blue sign-in sheets. We don't have a huge in-house viewing audience right now, but it would be nice to keep track of who has come, and so we could email you and let you know about the next forum specifically. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Steinberg.
Thank you, and I'll be very brief because I'm going to then turn it over to Mr. Churchill, who will guide us to the next piece. What we're trying to do with today's forum, after the brief introduction you've heard, is to have you help us to identify the essential questions and issues that should be examined early in the process and during the process. And so we're encouraging you to speak and to ask your questions, state your concerns, things that you recommend that the committee look into as this proceeds, things that citizens of Amherst need to know before they have to say yes or no to a proposal to regionalize. For those of you who are at home, because you're not here, we still want to hear from you and want your answers to those very same questions. And the email address you see on the screen behind us is a place that you can use to get your questions and concerns expressed to the committee. So with that, I guess the only ground rule I could ask for is that everybody who's here would like to say something, if you could just come on up and not be shy and sit somewhere near the microphone, because in order to have this useful to the people who are at home and watching it on Amherst Media tonight, or when it's on a repeat broadcast later, we need you at the microphone to hear from you. So please come forward if we have, because we would like to hear from you and have you near to the microphone. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Churchill.
All right, so this is where we want to hear from members of the audience. basically, what do you want the committee to look into? What do you want to make sure they do a good job of examining as they explore the questions and possible solutions around regionalization? So we will keep track of that and encourage you to give us your thoughts about what you want this committee to be looking into. Anybody? Michael?
Hello.
And if you could just state your name so that everybody at home knows who you are.
Yes. Mike Jakes, resident of Amherst. I have two children in the one in the elementary school and one in the middle school. So I'd just like to state that I'd like to support the K through 12 region. I believe a K through 12 region would help simplify the job currently done by our administration, which obviously oversees Union 26, Amherst K through 6, and 7 through 12 region, which is, as we all know, kind of a very muddy system of administration and governance. I also appreciate the challenges ahead for all the towns seeking to find a new governance structure. While I do support regionalizations, I have two concerns. The first is governance. Our current agreements with Union 26 and the region are over 100 years old and 50 years old, respectively. They are very much proportionally out of date and don't serve the very diverse community that is Amherst. In Amherst, we have a significant populations of low-income minority groups and special needs kids. While I am sure that all school committee members try to serve all of these groups and the populations of students as a whole, it is a very different thing to hear about the difficulties in our subgroups and walking a mile in the shoes of those parents who deal with those issues. I believe a slightly larger school committee would help make space for those voices on the committee. I believe it would serve the town's children and the administration to have better proportional representation than we do today. From the financial aspect of the region, my concerns are very simple. I want Amherst to pay the appropriate amount to educate Amherst kids supported by Amherst property tax dollars. As you're all aware, Pelham had not been paying the proper proportion of their bill for Union 26, not intentionally, but still it was a reality. This has now been corrected, but we may never know for how long the imbalance lasted, and I would like this situation not to occur again in the future. I would like to thank you all for your time and your willingness to serve on this committee. Take care.
So I'm trying to make sure that I capture these in short bullets. So are we talking about, in terms of governance, we're talking about proportionality, representation of subgroups, potentially a larger school committee to accomplish that, and then the notion of fiscal equity across the town. So,
right. I think for me, fiscal equity is probably what it really is today, and as long as we maintain that, I think we're good.
okay.
Obviously, there was, a blip with Pelham, but I think that that's been corrected, and it certainly wasn't intentional on anyone's part. As long as somebody's overseeing that a little better, it would be nice.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Okay.
Again, if you could please state your name for the people who are at home.
Okay, it's Vincent O'Connor. I'm a Precinct 1 town meeting member. I've lived in town for almost 40 years. And I guess I'd like to state a positive alternative. I know that a lot of the regionalization talk has been, has occurred because of the superintendency costs that occur to small towns. And I know that that's one of the efficiencies. I do have a positive alternative for the smaller towns that are in the region, which is that I think a town that has a single elementary school should be authorized, the principal of that school should be authorized to perform various superintendency duties that would essentially substitute for having a superintendent. That would save those towns some money. And I guess I'm particularly concerned because I've been through these ups and downs of regional transportation reimbursement, which are, we have the illusion of reimbursement. It was supposed to be 100% when regionalization was originally promoted, and it's never quite been 100%, and it's probably now down at about 50-60%. And so that's the transportation cost is in essence, I think, the counting the chickens, that we know won't hatch. Not just that before they're hatched, but that we know won't hatch. I look at it from two different perspectives. One, from the perspective of the town of Amherst. We have an elementary school population that is almost 50% or is 50% Black, Latino, and Asian. Has been this way for a couple of years. As of the MCAS exams, self-described through the MCAS exams 2 years ago. So my concern is that we are still doing sort of symptomatic programming for kids who come from those communities. We haven't yet removed the sort of the ceiling quota for professional staff, especially classroom, in the front of the classroom teachers, that's been here ever since I've been in town. Sort of a 10 to 15% ceiling. We've never quite gotten beyond it for whatever reason. And we're doing symptomatic relief, related to teaching to the test, MCAS instruction, trying to get schools out from the MCAS thing, and also doing disciplinary programs that I think don't get to the causes that generate some of these problems. So that my concern would be that we would be in a larger district with 3 more elementary schools. We would lose track. Those kids would be put on the back burner, which they can't be in Amherst when they're 50% of the school population. So that's my concern from the Amherst perspective. From the outside of Amherst perspective, the other 3 towns, I guess I have concerns about how those elementary schools would be used, for example, to house Amherst students when our 2 elementary schools are renovated, Fort River and Wildwood, and the cost that might be imposed on those towns that might lead almost immediately to a serious problem, financial problem that might break, things apart. And I would not want the concerns of the 3 outside towns to stand in the way of the renovation of those 2 elementary schools. I think we have planned very carefully and responsibly our capital budgeting so that when those schools are due to be renovated, we will have the capacity to pay for them, even without debt exclusions. And I'm very concerned that we may have problems with the renovation if those renovations create financial problems for the outside towns who have, as you've already said, newer schools. And I guess my final concern is that the schools in each of the outside communities really represent one of the central focal points of each of those towns. And it wasn't so much that I was dismayed by the closing of Marks Meadow, but I was dismayed by the process by which a couple of school committee members could run an anonymous blog, post outrageous and personal attacks on the parents of the Marks Meadow School, calling them all sorts of names as a vehicle to close that school. I was dismayed that the town did not slap that down. And I would be very concerned that we could enter upon a similar process directed at one or more of the elementary schools in the smaller towns and do incredible damage to those communities and to our own reputation. You know, people, said, well, somebody might say, well, it can't happen here, that would never happen here. But in the last 5 years, we have just gone through that process. And it was ugly. And it resulted, I think, in, as I went around 2 years ago campaigning for school committee, I have never in my life, in 40 years in this town, heard comments from the public who would open their doors and, without even giving me a chance to speak about my own candidacy, articulate in the strongest possible terms their anger and disrespect for the school committee members who led that effort. And I would just, so I think we have, those are very serious problems. And I wonder if this is the time. I think we might do well to postpone that process until our elementary schools are renovated and until we are sort of on an even terms with the outside towns, and until they have maybe explored the possibility of getting out from under these superintendency requirements that are financially burdensome, and that I think with some adjustment legislation that would authorize principals to act in certain respects, that it might save them a considerable amount of money. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. Next?
I actually have a question I think you could answer here, which is, what are the,
Can you get to the
Oh,
microphone? I'm sorry, but to the television audience.
I have a question I think you can answer, and I think I was expecting it from Alyssa in your very thorough and quick presentation, which is, how many students are at each school, and how many people are in each town? So do you have the numbers
I
on that?
don't, it's funny because I thought I had it too, and I didn't. But it's basically, do you want to take the quickest crack at it? Because my figures might be a little dated.
Yeah,
but
I actually don't have
it's
the
under
figures.
200.
Yeah.
It's under 200 in each of the other towns' elementary schools.
Yeah. The one thing I would add, I don't have it with me either, and I wish that I had brought, if I look through my notebook while we're going on, I will address it this evening. But when you go on to the website that's listed behind me, one of the documents in there is the report from the 2010
Yeah.
committee, and there's very detailed statistics on those subjects in that report, as well as historical enrollment trends for each of the 4 towns, broken out by grade for a number of years. So there's a wealth of information there, and I encourage everybody, whether they're here or at home, to explore the website and the documents there, because many questions might be answered from that of a statistical nature.
And then how many in Amherst, the elementary and the the upper schools?
Currently, we have other numbers here. For a little over 400 each at Fort
Yeah.
River and Wildwood, 200.
I would say
30.
Approximately
At
1,000
Crocker.
students.
So we have the 2 larger schools, Wildwood and Fort River, which are substantially different numbers this year, but still
Right.
in the 400 range. Crocker, which is almost only half the size, and then Leverett, Pelham, and Shutesbury at most have 175. Normally more like 125, and of
Right.
Pelham's 125, half of them aren't Pelham residents. They're school choice. So in terms of looking at a scale, all their elementary schools are much smaller than ours, is the most basic answer.
There's obviously a million issues to consider in this, and each
Yeah.
town has to look at their own. One of the things that jumps out to me is about proportional voting and representation, and, in Union 26, Amherst has 50% of the votes, Pelham has, 50%, and yet obviously the towns are really skewed in terms of population. If Amherst was a town full of African Americans, you would look at that and be sort of aghast. So to me, it sort of fundamentally feels unfair. And so one of my big questions is, are there any state or federal laws that cover this issue? I know that there's a lot of state and federal laws for every part of education, but is there some sort of guidance in that in terms of proportional voting, that you vote for the votes on your committees reflects the size of your towns?
Thank you. We'll definitely write that down as a question for the proportional voting. We know when it comes to unions that the law is very clear. It just says 3 and 3. For Union 26, even though it just so happened Pelham has 3 members, now we'll have 5. It's still going to be 3 and 3 because that's just the way that part of the law is written. But in terms of how proportional voting is done throughout Massachusetts, and there might be models elsewhere, and as you say, perhaps federal guidance associated with that, because it is done completely differently all over the state and in these handful of regions that exist, and for, again, very long historic reasons, as opposed to necessarily the way someone would create something now. So we will definitely look into what are the options. Does anyone have a list of options of what our choices are?
I did find that I have parts of the report from 2010 in my folder. I said I would look for them as we were talking. You have to remember that we're looking at data that goes back to the time that work was done in 2008 and 2009. So, and there have been declining enrollments and changing enrollments in many districts, as well as increases in school choice. So when I give numbers, please recognize that they are dated numbers and therefore have to be taken with that understanding. At the K-6 level, at that time, Shutesbury had 133 students, Leverett had 136 students, Pelham had 124, Crocker Farm had 250, Fort River had 445, Wildwood had 404, and Marks Meadow had 191.
That's 2008.
It's not listed specifically, but my guess is that would be correct. It would be 2008 or 2009.
And those numbers you're saying include choice kids, so you don't know.
That's correct. Now, when you get into the actual report on the website, and you will see where the school choice numbers are included and backed out, both of the report. There's a lot of appendices, and within the appendices, there's a lot of data that actually will answer that question for you. So,
Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience would like to advise or put up comments or questions for the committee to consider before we go back to people who spoke already? All right, Vince?
And again, because this may be as dated as some of the numbers you just gave, but my recollection is that the only Leverett and Pelham have authorized school choice. So the Shutesbury numbers are indeed all Shutesbury residents. And I don't think that's changed since that time. The other thing that occurred to me as you were speaking and giving the numbers is, and it's a sort of a problem because of the ed reform legislation in the 1990s in Massachusetts. I believe that all of the outside schools, Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury, are not on sort of MCAS probation of any sort. And all 3 of the Amherst schools are on some level of MCAS probation. And one of the problems I see is that because notwithstanding the Amherst Elementary School District's policy against out-of-district voluntary transfers, and there can't be any because if there was one school that was MCAS, not in the MCAS penalty box, so to speak, the parents could transfer their children to that school from the other two schools. But since all three are in the penalty box, then the prevailing policy is the one that the Amherst School Committee now has, which is that there shall be no out-of-district transfers, except for the kids who are bused from the apartments on East Hadley Road, who are bused respectively to one bus load to Fort River and a couple to Wildwood, I think. But I'm not too sure of those numbers. Somebody else may know them. So I would say that the fact that you're trying to join a school district that has all of its elementary schools in the penalty box to 3 towns, none of which have their schools in the MCAS penalty box, would, I think, create some problems. And it's an issue that whoever is on the committee that discusses this would need to explore. Because once those schools became part of a single school district, that subject to the limitations of the capacity of their classrooms, any student, there could be parents, every parent in Amherst whose child was in elementary school would have the right to go to one of those schools and request a transfer for their child. And that I think has the potential to create havoc, if nothing else. But again, it's this disparity. It's not just the large town and the 3 small towns, but it's the MCAS compliant towns and the town that doesn't have a school that's not in the penalty box. So it's certainly a topic that should be explored. However you resolve it, or what people think about it and discuss about it, but I don't think you can put these districts together without discussing that topic, because it could have an enormous consequences for a unified district.
Thank you. That hasn't come up before. So see, we did get new information.
Michael?
Mike Jakes again, resident Amherst. So listening to Vince speak earlier, it kind of brought to mind something I think a lot of us feel. I think you guys on the committee have made comments during the meetings, and I think that stating it publicly might help people from Shutesbury, Lever, and Pelham who are probably going to watch this at some point. And that though, when he was talking about Marks Meadow closing and how obviously people from the Marks Meadow area were obviously very unhappy about that, and they had a very good school. And for financial reasons, people like me supported closing it in order to make our budgets in the future. I could see how, and I know that that's a concern for Shutesbury, Lever, and Pelham, is having the elementary schools closed if they were to enter into a region where they didn't have enough voice to keep them open. And I think, I don't speak for everybody in Amherst, but I know that for a lot of people I've spoken to, that people in Amherst do understand that an elementary school can sort of be the heart of a town, and it's where people first initially come together. And so while I do support a K through 12 region, I also, in some ways, support trying to keep those elementary schools open for those towns, to keep that sort of soul or heart of the town going, so that residents feel like residents of their town. I'm not sure how you financially figure that out. I understand it's extremely difficult, and hopefully as we move forward, if we can get consultants, maybe someone has a creative idea. But I think it might be nice for the people of those towns to hear that we actually do care, that they're able to maintain their town at least at that level.
Thank you.
Anything else that people want to say right now, this evening? Because this has been very helpful, and there have been issues that you brought forward that have not been on the table for discussion. Referring to the comment that was just made, one of the things that we have been doing over the past several months is having joint meetings with the committees of the other 3 towns. This is not in any formal structure because we haven't voted to join the formal structure. We can't until they're in 2 forums. But we met with Steve Pennant, who's the executive director of Mass Association for Regional School Districts, and with Christine Lynch from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And Mr. Hemmons had made a point that you were referring to, and I think that was probably in kind of reporting what happened at that meeting. It came up. what his reflection was, and having worked with a number of districts that have gone through regionalization discussions and some that have actually gone through the next step, he actually done something with it. He identified what are common issues to come up, and I think that the three most common have actually been probably addressed to some extent this evening, because they are governance, the assessment formula that is used within the schools, and the question of maintenance or closing of schools within a regional district after it's formed, and how that is addressed in the regional agreement. Those are just three issues that he advised us to think about, and that was a very helpful discussion to have. We have not actually, in the Amherst Committee, gone beyond hearing that report and recognizing it. It's not that we've taken it to the next step and thought about what we would propose to do about it, but I appreciate you bringing it forward this evening, because it sort of validates that concern.
Might I?
Yes.
I'm going off script here.
Yeah.
This is, well, since we have a little more time and we have some people here who are very engaged in the situation, who I know have attended previous meetings associated with this, I can mention these two things and you guys can say, no, I don't want to talk about that now, or we can talk about them briefly. And one is something that I touched on earlier, associated with ability to pay. And that's associated with everybody talks that's involved in this at all, whether at the town level, school level, associated with the Chapter 70 formula. Everybody knows it's broken, nobody knows how to fix it, nobody really understands how it got to where it is. It needs lots of adjustments. It's not happening anytime soon. A couple of years ago, people were thinking maybe it was going to be fixed. It's not on anybody's agenda to fix right now, and anybody's that matters from the standpoint of the legislature at this point. All the providers want to do it, but none of the legislators do. So at this time, our regional agreement is basically looking at how many pupils you bring to the table. The state has a different way of looking at it that it would prefer, which tries to take into account lots of things, but includes what they consider to be relative ability to pay associated with income and the value of properties. And so that would certainly be something that would come up as part of this discussion, because we have been choosing not to follow the state guideline associated with that for several years now. Another committee that many of us served on in the past, because we couldn't come up with a way that really felt like those numbers that the state uses really did reflect the reality of Leverett, Pelham, Shutesbury, and Amherst. Is there any concern within this particular group here, or those of you watching at home, that you can then write to us about, contact us associated with that, about how we would look at that associated with if we had a K-6 elementary school? Would it be simply the number of students divided by the dollars we need, or would it have something to do with the relative wealth of the communities based on some magic formula somewhere?
Yeah,
And as a member, along with you, of the committee that looked at that a few years ago, I know we went into it thinking that we would, as Amherst residents, we felt that we had higher levels of poverty
Right.
than the other towns, and that there might be certain, a different allocation of cost on that, based on that. But when we actually got into analyzing the data, it's very difficult to do, because our poverty statistics are skewed by many penniless college students who live in town, and skew our numbers, but makes it very hard to figure out, exactly what the proportions are, and property values vary from town to town, so that sort of cuts one way and another way, and we ultimately decided that the best formula was one that people would understand, and people certainly understand the one kid, the dividing the cost on a per kid basis. But so it is something that a group of finance committee and school committee and select board members from all the towns looked at, and maybe 5 years ago, 8
Yeah,
years ago,
around
time
that.
flies
I
when we're
know.
having fun, but.
Exactly.
So it may be something that you want to wade into again, or it may be something you want to just refer to that effort and say, is that,
Right.
do we
But
want to do this again or
It would
not?
have to be laid out in the
Yeah.
agreement, is
Yeah.
what I'm saying, even though it might seem like retreading the same old ground again.
In my recollection of that, I was not on that committee, because, Alice
Carlozzi
Carlozzi
was
was
still
chair of the
chair,
finance
that's right.
committee at that time. But, one of the, major factors was that, it was very unpredictable from year to year, and the amount would vary substantially from year to year. And that was a hardship on all of the towns, but particularly a hardship on budgeting in the smaller towns. And so that the state formula, what I always refer to as the default formula, didn't really work for this region, and because it was impossible to understand, and because it was so unpredictable and variable from year to year. And therefore, we agreed in Amherst that it was better to make sure that there was stability for all of the towns in our region, and that a 5-year rolling average, which was the best system. When I gave those very small numbers for some of the other towns like Pelham, they had a large group in one particular year that graduated or came into this from elementary school and came into the secondary school. It would very quickly change their numbers, and 5-year rolling average therefore created a smoother path to change. So I think that those were the kinds of considerations that were considered at that time, and the kinds of considerations that would have to be examined again if we are to explore this on the elementary level.
If I could jump in, it seems like if you had Amherst students in it,
I'm sorry, can you just come up to the mic so we can, thanks.
since the hill towns are losing enrollment, in a way, having some Amherst students come in could help keep those schools more viable as they get smaller and smaller. So it seems like that it could be seen as a resource for, evening out those hills or giving different opportunities for schools for parents in Amherst. So I could see a benefit to the
Right.
regionalization.
Although enrollment is dropping in Amherst as well,
Mhm.
so, but you're right, that certainly sounds
So
like.
it seems like, in a way,
Yes.
being a bigger group can
Mm-hmm,
kind of help with the hills and the valleys. So.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the one other thing that I'll just point out is that for all of our students, and I'll pick, I'm referring to Amherst right now, we count on quality schools, not just K through 5 and 6, but also 7 to 12. And we need to have very stable and quality secondary schools that are now provided through our region. And because of that, as we look at the economic issues in this committee going forward, we need to think about the health, the financial health of the education throughout the system in all 4 towns, because it all interlocks with each other. And if it falls apart for one of the other towns, and that town then has to reject the region budget in any given year, and that happens in 2 towns, then if it happened in 1 town and 3 other towns voted yes, we take the chance of bankrupting 1 town. If it happened in 2 towns, we don't have a budget for the regional schools. And so that we are very committed to each other, and I think we have a responsibility to each other. And that's part of what we have to weigh very carefully as we move forward.
Okay. 2 of the issues that were spoken of briefly at the beginning are worth also looking at and getting a better statistical handle on as the committee does it. I mean, I haven't seen the figures, and those who serve on the committee may actually know them. But I would say the curriculum coordination, I think, is sort of attempting to achieve curriculum coordination in a town that has such an inflow and outflow of postdoctoral adults with their children and so forth. I'm aware of people who come here for a year, bring their children from Germany, Korea, whatever, and leave. Coordination, there is only a certain level of coordination that can be achieved in our regional schools by regionalizing the elementary schools. We have immigrants from all over the world a few years ago, I introduced to a couple of kids who come here from, I think, Gambia, living in North Village, because somebody who I knew them, knew their family. So the idea that, and we have private schools that are feeding into our region, the Common School, Montessori School, Hartsbrook, they feed in at different times. Some of them go through the 6th grade, others go through the 8th grade. So I just think that that's a hard one to chase, I think. And I think that I would put that further down on the list. And I think it's also true that because of the very diverse population that Amherst has, as opposed to the outside communities, there's difficulty coordinating because we have a much higher percentage of English language learners than do the other towns. And coordination assumes that you have children who are English capable at the same level throughout the process of K through 6. I mean, I just managed today after a late night phone call last night, to take a young lady to the University of Massachusetts where she had been accepted, but she had to take the TOEFL because even in 6.5 years here, her vocabulary was not sufficient to get her. I mean, she was admitted to UMass, but there was a question of whether she was going to have to take intensive English skills courses. And that's who we are. We can't escape that. I think the other issue is a cautionary note from the Western Hill towns, where an elementary school district decided after much very heated conversation to close a school in a small town. I think it was Worthington. And the net result of that closure was that the citizens, a group of people in Worthington bought that school and reopened it at a private school. And I think that the enrollment there is about 75 to 80% of what the public school enrollment had been at that school. There's only so much, and I think the closure of Marks Meadow, I think, if you look at the figures, directly led to some of the outflow that we had to the Chinese immersion school in Hadley. And so I think that sometimes these accomplishing these goals are just beyond the practical possibilities of human interaction. And to try to say it without, I'm sure that someone could say it more elegantly, but I do think that there are some things that that sound great, but if you try to put them together, you never can quite fit the pieces together.
Thank you.
And I think this may be one of those issues, but it's it's certainly important to explore those issues.
Thank you. And I want to briefly, Vince, address the issue of curricular alignment in that, if I understood you, the real goal of curricular alignment is to make sure that all the kids, sort of across schools and across abilities, are getting the same advantages and supports and learning the same things as the other kids in the other schools. So that's the goal. But
Yeah, I know, I understand the goal, but because of the
I understand.
the many
right.
streams that flow into
Yep.
the region, including the streams of kids from our own elementary schools who don't come here speaking English, and it's, even though they may spend K through 6 or 4 through 6, or in
Yep.
some cases 5 and 6, and then go into the region, they are not going to learn the same things, even if they come out of the same system.
It's a challenge.
I
hear
think
you.
it's, we have a very wonderful town in many ways, but it creates enormous educational challenges in terms, I mean, one of them is, can we get back to doing some of the social service things that might make these problems in our schools, less? We, like the Big Brothers Big Sisters that has 180 kids in Amherst on their waiting list and can't serve them for lack of appropriate volunteers and money.
Right.
And, maybe instead of putting money into educational programs, we as a town, but maybe not the other communities, may need to put money into social service programs that will actually end up having a very substantial educational benefit. Unburden the schools of doing things that they're not set up to do.
Thank you.
I want to bring us back for just a moment to something that Mr. Steinberg brought up earlier associated with the health of the regional schools as they stand right now, with leaving everything the same and understanding that there is a cost associated with doing things the way we do them now. And is that cost something we can continue to bear? Luckily, the recession appears to be things seem to be on the upswing economically, especially if the House budget goes through the way it is set up right now. But the question always has been, I'm sure, since the 1950s, when you look at your elementary schools in your towns, particularly if you're a one-school town, your Pelham, your Leverett, your Shutesbury, it's the center of your community, and you have to choose how to spend your money. Well, of course, every community in this region certainly spends the majority of its money on its schools, both the elementary and the region. Makes perfect sense. It's the way it should be. But as push comes to shove, where do they put the money? If their elementary school is the heart of their community, then it's much harder for them, perhaps, to justify spending the money at the region. If we don't spend the money at the region, and then we have fewer and fewer language programs, fewer and fewer athletic programs, larger class sizes, et cetera, that's the other thing that's behind all of this, is that ongoing concern associated with that if we leave things the same, will we still, given all the pressures that are on the individual communities, given the pressure that's already on Leverett and Shutesbury and Pelham, will they be able to contribute enough to the regional budget that we feel like the regional budget is good enough in Amherst? There have been comments in the past associated with, well, why does Amherst get to decide how much the regional budget's going to be? And, of course, the quick answer is, well, because we're the biggest. But that's obviously not the right answer. But associated with that is the fact that if we can't afford it, then chances are the other communities can't either. But there have been times when we have felt like we could afford a higher regional budget, but the other communities have said they can't. And so we have to determine where that push comes to shove associated with that. So any thoughts anyone would like to share from TV land or out here would be welcome on that as well, because that's one of the ongoing pressures we're looking at. Even if nothing changes, even if we all just go home and say we're not even looking at this regionalization thing anymore, that is something that Leverett, Pelham, and Shutesbury are certainly looking at, just as we look at it in Amherst when we say, well, how much of all of our total dollars is going to go to the elementary pie and how much of it's going to go to the regional pie. And then, of course, because we're connected to the other towns, all those parts do go together.
Just both specifically and more generally, I think I can remember years in which Amherst was willing to pay more and years in which Amherst was not willing to pay more, that other towns were willing to pay more. and there is a dichotomy, or a difference that happens when you have a region, when you're participating in a region at the, secondary level.
Right.
And when you have your own elementary school at the elementary level. And so, if you were talking about a K-12 region, obviously that dynamic wouldn't exist anymore.
Right.
You would have the general question which we face with
Right.
Sure.
with the region now, which is sometimes some towns have more or less ability or willingness to pay, but you wouldn't have do I want to save some money for my elementary school
Exactly.
versus give some to the whole region, which is mostly Amherst kids. So, but in a more general sense, then I think the question of governance was raised and proportionality. I think you're also going to need to sort of weigh proportionality versus political
Right.
acceptability. And I don't know what leeway you have on that legally, but from my perspective now, and this is the challenge that comes with having one big town and 3 small towns, is this, if you're in a small town, your concern is that your vote is going to be swamped by the big town. If you're in the big town, you want to have control, or you want to have your population represented. And so I think that the proportionality that we have now, while I don't understand why Pelham has 2 votes and Shutesbury and Leverett each have 1, the notion that there are 4 votes from the small towns and 5 from the large town will not be proportional is in some way politically acceptable if you're a small town, because you figure, all right, they could still outvote us if they come together as a block, but if if small towns pick off 1 member of the Amherst committee, then they can have a voice. And so I think there's something to do with, if you're partners, a big partner and small
Right.
partners, they still have to feel that they have a voice, and they can, I've never felt that our educational goals are that different from town to town, but if you do get to a situation where you're worried about each member of the district having some voice, then a strict proportionality where you have 7 members from Amherst and 1 each from the other towns, or whatever it is, might not be politically viable, because the other towns would say, well, why would we enter into this
And
if people vote along town lines,
Right.
we don't.
And my
fair.
understanding, and Andy and Alyssa, correct me if I'm wrong, but Stephen Hemman talked about sort of the legality versus the political formation of these regions, and he said that there were several regions in the state who didn't follow the law exactly, but rather had political regional boards, much like our own, for just that reason. So that the regional committee felt as a true region, as a team, making decisions for kids in the region as a whole. And that you do want the smaller towns to feel as though they have a real voice in what's going on in the region. So, I mean, there are regional, like our own, there are plenty of regional districts that
It's gonna be tricky.
it will be tricky. It will be tricky.
Because if you're,
But
from a strictly Amherst perspective, of course you'd like to run the whole thing.
although, I mean, you say that, but
Perhaps
I
not.
think they're,
But you wanna make sure that
you want to make sure you're
Your
well
kids are
represented.
represented.
Absolutely, but also I think that, again, I'm not so sure that our educational goals are so different that, that we have to be sure that we can always, I don't know that they're so different,
Yeah.
and so,
One of the things that I think our committee wants to do and hasn't had an opportunity, and I think that the conversation tonight emphasizes the need to do this, is to look at the other regional districts across the state and to see what models they have used, and to try and find other regional districts where there is one community that is by population much
Mhm.
larger than others in that particular region, and find out what is there. And I know that information is available, we just
Mhm.
have not had the opportunity opportunity yet to find it. But there are many towns, when you think about it, where it's not unusual for the largest community to be the home to the high school and other towns nearby in some manner participating in the high school, and to the extent that those come through our regional districts, there may be some models that we will be able to find and examine as this process continues. So, shall we?
Yeah.
And, I think that at this point, it's probably time to draw this to a close for this evening. I want to just address for a minute or two what the next steps are in the process, both for this committee and for the process as a whole. And then once again, to invite people who are watching on Amherst Media and are not here with us tonight, and people in the audience who have things that they want to share, to use the email address that was behind us.
That was.
Which is now off. The regional is RS.
What do you
there it is.
know? It's a little small now,
It's a little smaller, but
but
it's RS for Regional School
School
District
District
Planning
Planning Committee.
So it's rsdpc@amherstma.gov. And the website that's listed below,
Thank you,
again,
Jerry.
providing the information. We will now take this information and the questions and concerns that you have provided and the challenges that you have identified and use them to guide us as we go through the next weeks of our process as a single Amherst committee, so that we can have a second forum and continue this discussion and provide some of the information you provided. I'll give you an example of something that I had not thought about previously, but I heard, which is Mr. O'Connor's suggestion that we consider whether in a small district a principal can serve functions of a superintendent. I imagine that there are legal requirements of the Commonwealth for what are the duties of the superintendent that may make that impossible. And they may have created that simply because that's why they have school unions, as a way for small districts to get around that problem. And there may be practical problems, but certainly worth looking at and seeing whether those legal or practical problems are out there. So each of these things that you provided us provided a wealth of information, and we're going to do the best that we can, both before the next forum and after the next forum, to address those issues. The next step in a process for consideration of the regional district, as was noted earlier, is the formation of a regional school district
Planning board.
board, which is different from planning committee because it actually has structure across all of the towns that choose to participate in it. And we want to make sure that if the other towns are moving forward participating in the board, that we participate in the board with them. And so we have to be very cognizant of that. One of the things that the community has already found is that the formation of a regional district planning board is a next step, but is not a final step, and that there are as many or more times that the planning board will form, consider these issues, and it never reaches the formation of a regional district, but that it is a formal mechanism for the four towns, in this case, or some group of towns, to come together to actually consider the kinds of issues and see if there are solutions. So even if we take that next step, forming the board, there's no assurance that there's going to be an agreement that's going to come out of it. And even if an agreement comes out of it, at that point, it has to go back to the town meetings in each of the towns and be approved before there actually is creation of anything different. So this is a long process in which we're really very near the beginning. I think with that, I would leave it to say that, with just one other point, we were asked by town meeting to have 2 forums before joining a regional school district planning board. As a committee in our meetings, we've recognized that there really need to be a lot more than 2 forums because there needs to be community engagement throughout the process. And so that if we have a second forum in May, it is a second forum. It is by no means the final forum because we need to be engaging with all of you continually as this proceeds, either to a resolution that, hey, this is a good idea and here's a proposal, or to the conclusion that that the current arrangement is what is going to continue to be and that you're not solving the problems. But we need your participation throughout. So with that, I'll turn it back to our chair and see if she's any, or my colleague has
Did you
anything to
have
add.
something?
I was just going to mention before our chair wraps up that we, as a committee, of course, continue to meet. The 3 of us, and several of you have attended those meetings. We have now met 9 times already. And that's in addition to the times we've met with the other groups that informally to hear these various guest speakers that we've talked about. So all those meetings are public. We're having a little trouble keeping up with keeping our agendas and minutes online, but they're all available. They'll be online very soon on our website, those that aren't. And we will continue to meet. We're obviously going to have a meeting very shortly after this. And as Andy said, we'll have that next forum in May, and assuming it's kind of looking like these 4 towns are coming together, probably we would decide at a meeting of the 3 of us, that would be another public meeting, to move forward with joining into a board. But again, we would have lots more meetings after that. All those meetings that they're currently having get posted, have minutes, have agendas, et cetera. You can find all that stuff on the town website, usually the school website as well. And so there are lots of ways to be engaged with that moving forward. Like Andy said, next forum in May is certainly not the end of any process. We're just trying to keep things going so that we're in sync with the other communities as they continue to bring in speakers, and as we all continue to look for funds on how to pay for some expertise associated with this.
Thank you. And I want to thank those of you that made it out tonight for a public forum. And for those of you at home, please do participate in this process and send us your questions and comments and suggestions, I hope, for not just the public forum in May, but going forward, the best way for us as a committee to communicate with the community. Because we do understand that coming to these public forums is not possible for everyone. But we do want to reach as many members of the community as we possibly can and stay engaged so that we have this discussion as a town of Amherst. So thank you. And we will, and look for, please, the date of our next forum, which seems as though it's going to be sometime in late May. Thanks very much. And thank you,
Great.
Andy,
Thank
for
you.
helping us tonight.
And I'd also like to thank Amherst Media for
Yes.
Thank you very
being with
much.
us and making it possible for the community to join us.
And Jerry
Thank you.
Champagne for showing me how to turn this
Yes.
machine on.
Thank you.